Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Manitoba Agriculture Crop Talk webinar. If you have any questions during the presentations today, please type them into the Q&A icon on your Zoom toolbar, and we'll get to them at the end of each presentation. This webinar is being recorded, and you will receive a link to the recording. Thank you.
Thanks, Laurie. I'd like to welcome everybody to this week's edition of Crop Talk. And this week, we actually are going to have, for the next 2 weeks, we're going to have different members from the different diversification centers come on and talk about some of the stuff that's going on in their locations. Because they got tours coming up, and it would be good to kind of get a little bit of an update of what's going on. So then you can select which day, or if you want to go to all days, which one will be the one that I guess sparks your interest the most. So today we're going to start off with WADO and PCDF. But before we get into them, I just put together a couple slides. First one, we've got a lot of wet conditions out there in some areas. Some areas maybe not quite as bad, but there's areas that wet conditions are showing up. We're starting to see yellowing in fields and yellowing in those spots, and I think producers are having some difficult times getting it out there to get whether it's finishing off spraying for weed control or to start spraying for fungicide for disease control. And I think the biggest thing you need to do is monitor your fields. If you can get out there with a high clearance, get out there as quick as you can, because the weeds are getting bigger. If you can't get out there, I know that's planes are an option, and but they were busy, so you may not be be able to get it done as quick as you want. But I think there's definitely something to be looking at there to get the planes out and get them going. Especially with fungicides, diseases are starting to show up in pretty much every area right now, and in pretty much every crop. So we need to be getting out there and getting those fungicides on as well. So it's hard to deal with wet conditions, but I think we got to do the best we can to get out there, and even if we have to go around some of these wet spots, it's something that I think will pay in the long run if we could keep the rest of the field clean from weeds and clean from disease. Got this picture sent to me this week from Todd Drummond from Bear Crop Science, and regarding rust showing up in spring wheat. And so again, just to show you that some of these fields have already been sprayed with a fungicide, and the disease is still showing up. So I think the pressure right now is pretty great. We got high humidities, we've got wet conditions every morning. So I think we need to keep on top of things. Right now, the potential is there for a good crop in a lot of areas. So keep on top of it. Keep on top of your crops. Get out there and keep scouting, and try to get fungicides on as quick as you can, and try to get them on there at the right timing if you can as well. So just a couple slides there. If you've got questions, please feel free to give any of your extension specialists a call. So with that, I'm going to give the screen over to Scott Chalmers, and Scott is the member from the WADO, and he will be introducing himself and talking about what's happening in WADO in Melita area.
Great. Can you hear me?
You bet, Scott.
Okay, right on. Yeah, my name is Scott Chalmers. I'm an applied research specialist in Melita at WADO, and we have quite a good lineup of projects this year. I'll just get right into it here. So I'm part of one of the 4 diversification centers, and James will speak on behalf of PCDF, and I'm at WADO. We're scattered across the province in different zones. Up in Roblin, it's quite cool there, and down in Melita in the Banana Belt, it's quite a bit warmer. And Arborg, and yeah.
We can't see your screen yet. So
shoot. All right, here we go. Does that work better?
Looks good.
Okay. So we're scattered across the province, down in the Banana Belt in Melita here. It's quite a bit warmer than up in Roblin, generally. And this is just your normal core and heat unit map. And so this kind of gives a little bit of power here where we can test the same project in different locations under different situations. And I thought I'd throw up this map. This is for this year, the accumulated core heat units, and things are quite cool, actually. I wish the index was on the blue side. We're actually short on heat units, as everybody can tell. In Melita, we're at 91% of normal, and at Roblin, it's 79% of normal. So we got a long way to go, but this heat this week has been really nice to match what the normal percent of normal precipitation we've been getting. So we're at over 31% of normal, and Roblin is at 173% of normal. So quite a bit wetter. And then at Carberry, I don't know if I believe this number, but it's 239% of normal. That's 287 millimeters. And I had heard of reports around Dauphin of getting 20 inches this year. So quite a stark difference from last 3 or 4 years, at least for most of the province here. So great change in situation. Here's the teams at each of the sites, and if it wasn't for them, we wouldn't have much to talk about today. They're the ones that basically do all the work in the field. So yeah, WADO, we have about 7 employees, and at PCDF, there's about 5 or 6 there. What we do, we basically do small plot research with diversified crops. We often work with cropping systems, so possibly like intercropping, for example. We do rotation work. We can do pilot scale kind of collaborations where we maybe grow an acre or 2 of something and then send it along for pilot processing. We do lots of variety trials, and I think about half of our program is a variety trial program. And then we also just work with our fellow partners in the government, academia, commodity groups, private industry to answer all the questions we have. To date, we've added up all the crops we've tried, and it's up to over 145 crops at the diversification centers. And not all these crops have a commodity group attached to them. So a lot of those end up in our lap to look into. So, but for the most part, we still work with a lot of commodity crops, and because they really do pay the bills. Starting at the top, it all starts with an idea. And this is where many stakeholders or even farmers come up with an idea, and it trickles down to doing some basic research, maybe at the university level. And then once it gets into our hands, we're at the applied research level where we need to kind of see how things go in the field. And then we maybe have a field day or a day like this where we talk about what's going on to extend that knowledge to the farmer, and then hopefully they adopt it. And anytime during that chain, we get some feedback back to the original idea and just keep on improving. And we are working with, of course, a lot of stakeholders. We have, like I mentioned, government departments, and that's federal and provincial generally. We work with the industry, like the commodity groups and academia. And we've actually formed a provincial advisory committee, which we meet several times a year to better make the diversification centers work better and the projects that we bring in, so that there's more of an informed decision made, and just keeps communication lines open so that everything works really good. So how do we come up with our projects, or how do we select them? generally, we collect the ideas over the year, and then the board of directors for each site makes the final decision on what they would like to see. So that provincial advisory council I talked about, we basically run some of the ideas past them to see if we can strengthen some of the projects or improve the functionality of the diversification center. And then the board members, who are generally farmers, are the ones that make the final call. So what's happening at WADO? We have about 50 projects this year and 2,360 plots that are data plots over 8 locations. So I'll start with our cereal projects. We have quite a few oats. This year we expanded our Solio collaboration. We have quite a few more plots with them. We're working with General Mills, and we have the McVet variety trials, which end up in the seed guide. Moving on to barley, we have collaborations with Ag Canada, and we're looking at malt barleys, hulless barleys, and food barleys with them. We have a collaboration again with McVet and the Canadian Malt Barley Technical Center, which uses some of the samples to do their malt testing downtown Winnipeg. Then moving on to winter wheat and rye variety trials, that's with McVet. They look very good, and our rye is entering a soft dough stage right now. The spring wheat with McVet looks very good. I haven't seen any rust, but I haven't actually looked that close, so I'll have to keep my eyes open there, Lionel. We also have a winter wheat project with Ducks Unlimited, and we're looking at split nitrogen, so applying some in the fall and some in the spring, and then just comparing 2 spring applications. And I'll show you a picture later here, but it's quite pronounced with all this rain this year. And then in the red there, those are the new projects. We have a winter cereal intercrop project with different clovers, alfalfa, and perennial ryegrass. That's funded by the MCA. We have winter oats, winter barley, winter wheat, and we fall seeded those, and we also compared it to dormant seeding. And the winter wheat survived for sure, but most of the other crops failed their vernalization with the barley and the oats. We just, for whatever reason, they didn't make it through the winter as a fall seeding, but the dormant seeding just looks like grass, and it didn't have enough cold to vernalize. And then we grew a block of winter wheat with hairy vetch. We needed the vetch seed in our stock. We're getting low on it, and that's one way to grow it. And if you come out to field day, it's quite a spectacle. Continuing on here, we have a couple of greenhouse gas studies, one with Mario Tenuta, looking at a nitrogen inhibitor. Last year we tried Super U, and this year we're trying N-Trench. And then with Ducks Unlimited, we also have another GHG project. This one looking at different timings of nitrogen. So one in the fall, one in the spring, and different forms with UAN and urea. And we're trying different inhibitors like Super U and Agrotane for that. And I know we've been getting compliments from Brandon Research Center on how well the samples are going, because the data is coming in very good. We also have a Fusarium head blight screening project with our department and the university, basically looking at winter wheat, spring wheat, and barley and durum varieties, just checking in with their models and seeing how they perform. We have different resistance ratings for each of those varieties. Here's that split nitrogen trial I was talking about that was responding very well to all this moisture. You can see light and dark green stands. This is going to be a good sign that the data is going to be really, really informative. This is the Ducks Unlimited study. This is an older picture just coming out of spring. And again, really great responses from fertilizer. You can tell So this is going to be some neat stuff to see. And then the greenhouse gas project with Mario Tenuta, again, getting great responses. There's dark and light areas in the field that we're sampling, showing definitely a nitrogen response, but we're also just checking to see if those gases are staying in the ground with their inhibitor like they're supposed to or not. Moving on, we have some annual forages, and this is quite a stark year with the cool temperatures. On the left, sorghum took forever to come out of the ground, even though we planted very close to June. It just wasn't warm enough, where the barley, the pea oat and the oat are well on their way. This is an older picture. It's actually quite far along now. The millets in the background did catch up to, I would say, the spring cereals. But the sorghum is still about 4 inches tall. Looking on to corn here, we have the corn variety trials with MCA and McVet. They look pretty good. They do need some heat though. We have a Pride Grain and Forage Corn project where we're irrigating varieties of grain and forage, and then also comparing it to the dry land side. So we just kind of get to know what is the maximum potential we can get to for those. And we did try to do a corn soybean intercrop, which is more meant for forage, but it failed because the soybeans got compacted with the wet conditions, and we did seed them a little deep. So that was my mistake. Moving on to oil seeds, we got the canola variety trials, which is new to us. It's been a couple of years since we've been able to do them. And this year they're much bigger. They're not just small plot, they're triple wide plots. We have a linseed co-op with Dr. Benjamin Tarrin at Ag Canada in Saskatoon. Flax seed treatment project. I think we're looking at VitaFlow and Ensure Pulse with those. And that's with EMCA, and we have the sunflower variety trials, which will have oilseed sunflower, but also the confects as well. And then we have a partnership with Dr. Baifeng Cheng out of Ag Canada in Saskatoon, looking at the yellow, brown, and Genesea mustards. We have 2 locations. It's just basically a variety co-op, so the upcoming varieties. This is that flax seed treatment project, getting a great response with the yellow flax because it has a brittle seed coat, and having Ensure Pulse on that has really helped it along to survive where the untreated was not doing well at all. This is last year's shot of the sunflower row spacing project, looking at solid seeded 15-inch and 30-inch rows at different populations of 18,000 to 26,000 plants per acre. Last year, the birds got us, even though it looked fantastic. This year, the project still looks great, and hopefully we can do something about those birds. This is this year's look at the project. This is a couple weeks old, but nonetheless, you can see the differences of size, the solid seeded on the left and the 30-inch on the right. You tend to get these gaps in the solid seeded that are producing nothing, and then maybe clusters of plants that are kind of competing with each other. And we're just trying to see, are we just better off just putting them in with a planter? Economically, of course, we're going to look at that. We have a few bean projects. This one with the U of M, that with Kristen McMillan, we're looking at beneficial nitrogen fixation that naturally resides in the environment, and then also looking at how nitrogen and inoculants work together or separately. We've been getting great responses in Melita, and again, I think this year we're seeing more responses. This is an older picture from a couple of years back, but we have consistently seen inoculants work, and possibly in tandem with nitrogen application. And then we also have a dry bean co-op with, I guess no longer with Dr. Anfu Howe, it's with Valero in Ag Canada in Ottawa, rather. So we just continue that co-op. And then we have the McVet variety trials that we typically do. Looking this year into lupins for the second year in a row, we have blue lupins, white lupins, and then we had a client come up to us at Crop Connect and was interested in testing yellow lupins, and I can say they just started flowering a few days ago, which is promising. But we'll see if they compare to yellow peas in terms of yield and protein. Moving on to peas here. This is sort of an older picture at the top, but now they're about 3 to 4 feet tall, as I seen yesterday. We have the variety trials for McVet. And then some of those samples go to Dr. Jim House at the U of M for protein testing on his project. We partnered with Peter Giesbrecht with Pulse Genetics. He has kind of a little co-op going as well. And we did try some winter peas and lentils, but they did not overwinter. We seeded them last fall, but I guess it was just too cold for those. We're looking at using mustard meal in pea to test for root rot efficacy, so that the mustard meal basically gives off a glucosinolate cyanide derivative and gases the soil of any root rot. So we just dug up the roots yesterday. The promising thing was the roots looked a little bigger for the pea with having the mustard meal. Now we'll have to leave it to the numbers to see if it combated something like Aphanomyces or Fusarium. We're also partnered with a pulse cluster looking at copper sulfate and or phosphate on pea to see if it helps with root rots. We just dug up those roots yesterday as well. Looking here, we started just kind of a one-off project with herbicides on alfalfa, sweet clover, or red clover, and we're just screening for pre or post application herbicides to see which are compatible and which are not. Soybeans, we're looking at, again, the variety trial with Roundup and conventional types. And we're partnered with Manitoba pulse growers, pulse and soybean growers on that. We have, again, Dr. Jim House looking at the protein and the soybean. And then we have an irrigation project where we're comparing dry land and irrigated varieties of conventional soybean that are generally used as kind of the foundation of breeding stock, and looking at the protein content differences between irrigated and dry land. Last year, I think it was a couple of % better protein for the irrigated, and that this will be year 2 of 3. Some of the diversified crops, we have our good old berry orchard that was established over 10 years ago in 2011, and we're looking at cherries, Haskap, and Saskatoon. Just visited there this week, and I haven't seen any Haskap really produced, but maybe the local kids are getting it. The Saskatoons are just about to pop, and they're about 6 feet tall. The cherries are in basically full development, tons of cherries out there. And I did see a hornet's nest, so I didn't want to go much further than that, and I think they're dealing with it today, so that could be interesting. Quinoa variety trial looks okay this year. I'm not sure if everything worked okay on the seeder, but it is there. It's not as great as I've had in the past, but we've already had a few bugs assaulting us. The stem borer, and then another was a leaf hopper of some kind. And then we have some teff grain and forage trials with James. I'll let him talk about that. Hybrid industrial hemp looks pretty good this year. It's really liking the moisture. And I'll kind of finish up here. We have a few extension plans at this point. For this year, of course, our field day is July 25th, and we've decided to kind of change it up and do a bus tour, just to add a bit of comfort, but also to see what else is going on. Because generally in the past, we would set up our field day at the broadleaf site, and we started talking about the same thing from year to year, and it was kind of getting old. And I thought, well, let's get on a bus. It's a little more comfortable and check other things out. So it starts down at the river park where the ball diamonds are, about 9:15 if you want to check in, and then get on the bus at 10 o'clock. But I would like to insist that you RSVP first, so that we know how many are joining the tour, because we have limited seating, of course, having buses. Then I'll be probably talking to the Agri 1600 class at the U of M, just on special crops, that sort of thing. They usually get me to come. Of course, there's Ag Days and Crop Connect. We'll have our booths there as diversification centers. Our annual report is always usually published around the end of March. Of course, you can see last year's report now online, and you can look at all the results that we have come up with. And then we'll probably be in several publications, as we normally are. Most notably the Seed Manitoba Guide for all the McFet projects. And this is just kind of the info graphic for the bus tour. And I'm really excited. We got a lot of good speakers coming. We're going to be talking about the hemp, the pea fungicide project, the flax seed treatment trial. Laura Schmidt's coming to talk about pea weevils and those tough root rots like Phytophthora and Phanomyces. Going to be looking at those greenhouse gas experiments, sunflower varieties, the protein irrigation study, and lots to see at the winter cereals. So with that, this is my contact info. The website's right there, mbdiversificationcenters.ca. And I'll pass it off to James.
Okay, thanks, Scott. What I'll do is we'll let James take over, talk about PCDF, and then questions at the end, if that's okay.
Sounds good.
Thank you, Scott. The great thing about going after Scott is that he has done such a great job of explaining who we are and what we do that I don't really need to repeat myself a lot. What he didn't mention is that if you don't RSVP for his tour, you're going to get strapped to the top of the bus. There's always room up there. Actually, in our area, we have, Scott showed some precipitation maps, and yeah, it is. We've had some areas around here with 20 inches of rain, and anecdotally, actually, some people have reported 28 inches of rain on their particular farms. So there has been a lot of rain up here. But so far, Roblin has kind of been in a little bit of a sheltered zone. So that's good news for us. So I'll talk now about Parkland Crop Diversification Foundation, which, as I've mentioned, is located in Roblin. And we call it PCDF for short, because that's way too much of a mouthful to say too often. And we're part of the Diversification Center group, which, as Scott described, is located across the province. So I just want to kind of outline a little bit about who we are or what we do. Really, the people that we work with, we've got a very seasoned crew with, some of us have been here for 6 to 8 years, so that's great. We've got a lot of expertise under our belt. And we rent land that is owned by the municipality locally here, and that allows us to have a pretty predictable land base. We rotate across the quarter section, and as you can see from the image, the top-down image here, there is a pivot which is located. It's kind of pointing towards whatever that would be, 6 o'clock, I guess, and currently it's not functioning, so there's actually been some discussion with the RM about removing that pivot, which would open up some additional land for us to use. Here's a list of also some other infrastructure that we have, which, I won't go through the whole list here, but what this has allowed us to do over time is to really become more versatile in the types of projects that we would be able to work with, as well as much more sensitive in terms of timing, getting out there, having sometimes redundant multiple pieces of the same equipment allows us to really have a lot of flexibility and versatility there. So that's definitely a strength that has grown over time. Scott and I have both good stories about the old days when, you know, before my time actually at PCDF, they had no shop at all, and all the work was happening on the back of a flat deck trailer out in the field. So things have definitely come a long way. And that's to say nothing of the rats and raccoons in Scott's shop. The focus areas are really a reflection of where we are located in the province. So Scott has outlined a project list for this year, which includes a lot of things like sunflowers, dry beans. Those are definitely more heat-loving crops than we can grow up here. Sunflowers kind of begin to show up in fields only if you think of driving from Russell down towards Neepawa, really right around Neepawa is when those sunflowers appear in fields around it. And so even soybeans actually are fairly infrequently grown here. And truth be told, I haven't seen a soybean field in the Roblin area for probably about 5 or 6 years, although they are more common as you go towards Dauphin. So that's kind of a reflection of the fact that we just are a lot cooler. And in some ways, that's actually to our advantage because it means that crops like peas really, really do very, very well up here, faba beans as well. And hemp is something that grows extremely well as well. There's just those long, long days. And then the cooler weather for crops like peas prevents a lot of that aborting of flowers and so on. As I mentioned, that hemp has historically been a very important crop for PCDF. It was one of the sites where pretty much as soon as the crop was legalized in Canada, we began testing it here. So a lot of the agronomy work that is still, you know, kind of cutting edge agronomy was developed at PCDF. Other than that, we also grow variety trials, as I mentioned, peas, agronomy trials, which, you know, is kind of looking at more nuanced aspects of growing crops. And more recently, we've been looking a lot at forage and crop livestock systems, which I'll talk about more in a moment. So I guess we could ask what's up in 2024. Scott has done a great job of going kind of more line by line through the project list. A lot of overlap between our sites, so that's something that you know, we don't, as I mentioned, there's going to be certain trials that we don't grow because it doesn't fit our region. Some other things that are more local interest, but there's a lot of overlap between us, especially when it comes to McVet. But I will spend some time talking about maybe more unique projects. What we're looking at here is, if you kind of stare down into the crop row, there's some canola that has been planted into a cover crop. So that's part of Jessica Fry, who my wife, so the last name shared is not a coincidence. So she's doing a master's project with Joanne Thiessen Martins at the U of M, which is looking at growing wheat and then following it up with canola being grown with a cover crop. The idea behind that, in a nutshell, could be that, you know, if we're going to sort of play with the expression that people use, if you can't beat them, join them. We talk a lot about the fact that there's a very short wheat canola growing rotation, especially in our parkland area. So we've been looking at ways that could potentially diversify what is otherwise a very undiverse rotation. Rather than trying to add additional crops in between the wheat and canola, is it possible that we could diversify those years? So if we flick forward here to this slide, you'll see that in 2023, the sites established a wheat crop with, in this case, there's a red clover, there's also white clover, alfalfa, yellow clover, and a perennial ryegrass as a non-leguminous cover crop in there as well. Though that was established in 2023, which we remember was a very dry year. And again, in 2024, we have reestablished that same year one at a number of the sites. What we found in a nutshell was that the presence of the cover crop did not appear to affect the establishment or the yield of the wheat really at all. Minimally at some locations, depending on the cover crop, but overall, we could say that there was statistically no difference in wheat yield. And then if we flick forward here to this year, you can see that we established a canola crop into that cover crop. This is where the story gets a little more complicated because, as I said, there was no effect in the wheat crop, even in a very dry year where you would expect that cover crop would be stealing a lot of moisture from the developing wheat. However, this year, even with a lot of moisture, or perhaps because of the amount of moisture, we're finding, at least at our site, that the canola is, I was going to say having a lot of trouble establishing in the cover crop, but I think a maybe more blunt way of saying that is that it is not establishing in some of the, as you can see, the sweet clover stands are very rank, very thick, and only in the control plots where there's no cover crop are we actually seeing decent canola establishment. So it's an interesting system. We planted a Clearfield variety, excuse me, a Clearfield variety which allowed us to spray Aries on there, which the goal was that would be something that would knock back the cover crop without killing it. In my opinion, so far, just observationally, it seems like killing it probably would be a better option because it's just not competing. But that's thankfully the goal of research. You know, we joke at least that a good motto for PCDF would be that we're willing to fail so that you don't have to. The idea being that research isn't necessarily always supposed to be aimed at the right solution or exactly what you should do. Sometimes it's quite valuable to find out what you should not do. And I think without closing the book on the season, because we're only partway through it, it seems as if this is probably an idea that you should not do, is planting canola into these cover crops. You can see that the Aries herbicide here is indeed working on the cover crops. This is not actually throwing them back nearly as much as we had hoped to see. Moving on to another project, we established a fall rye block at our site in 2023 in September. And then this year, at the very tail end of May, we fenced it off and we brought in some cattle. So in this case, we grazed these animals. That was about 5,000 pounds of animal that was grazed on the rye for roughly a week. It was just a little bit over a week. And so what we're looking at doing is trying to extend the grazing season in both directions, kind of making it a little bit earlier and ideally make it a little bit later at the end of the year. There has been some really interesting work done with Ag Canada and kind of continuing on with Manitoba Ag that shows that if a perennial pasture is grazed 1 week too early in the spring, that reduces the grazing season by 3 weeks at the end of the year. So basically what you're doing is drawing down the roots of the perennial pasture too quickly, and the plant is not able to replenish its sugars after the winter, and therefore it suffers in the fall. It's kind of like borrowing money in the and then not being able to repay the debt later on. So the goal with the rye here is actually to provide a lush forage for the animals. It's kind of like a sacrifice pasture. The question, of course, then becomes, well, what do we do with it afterwards? We've tried to, we've looked at letting it regrow. We did it last year with some sheep, and the heads did regrow well, and so we were able to provide or harvest roughly about 60% of the yield of an ungrazed rye crop. But I think we could do more interesting things than that. So what we've done now is actually we grazed it down to the ground, and then following that, we sprayed it with Roundup to kill it off. And in this photo, what we've done is we've seeded a warm season cover crop that's available from Covers & Co, but it you know, a similar type of pasture mix should, or of hay mix, would be available from a number of different companies. And as you can see it from the top here, it contains things like some turnips or radish, some sunflower. Of course, there's some oats, forage pea in there. This is kind of a mix of things that's designed to take advantage of the heat that we now are going to be, fingers crossed, that we will be having for the rest of the summer. And you can see that it's done great, even just being seeded right into the rye stubble, and even in the case of this photo, right into a cow pie. So it's doing pretty well. And then this photo shows, given that the animals came off right around the 10th of June, and it took us a little bit of time to get the animals off the place. We had to do a little bit of work with our fencing and do the spray. So it wasn't until about the 20th of June that we actually seeded these things. If you look at the crop insurance deadlines for buckwheat, it's actually June 21st. So this crop, we expect that it's going to make it to seed as well. What could be kind of interesting is that buckwheat is, there's some discussion about that being having a good market in some of these complex cover crop blends that are being sold into the US. So there's some interest there to revivify, I guess, the buckwheat production in Manitoba. So the point being that this is a cropping option after the cattle have been grazed. This is a photo of the lupin trial that Scott mentioned. This is new for us. So there's a couple years of growing experience at some of the other centers. We have historically grown a blue lupin here as part of a intercrop mix with wheat, but this is our first time growing them as monocrops. We've had a little bit of a unusually cool, as Scott showed, unusually cool spring so far. And also a very wet one. So we also are noticing in the lupins as well as in soybeans that there's a bit of iron deficiency chlorosis going on. So that just probably will perk up a bit as it starts to warm up here, and hopefully is not quite so wet. We've also got a hemp trial here. This is, as I mentioned, there's been years and years of hemp research going on at this site, and we've developed some very good relationships with hemp researchers. This is a hybrid hemp trial, which is exciting. It's actually the second year that we have grown this. And last year there was a little bit of an issue with some of the seed supply. So there was kind of not really our fault that the plots didn't look very great. This year the seed supply is great. So what's exciting about this is that hemp breeding although hemp breeding is going on actively in Canada, a lot of the new hemp varieties that are being put on the market are actually just being imported from, for example, from Poland or from Serbia or wherever they may be found in Europe, some Chinese varieties as well. These are, in fact, crosses, so hybrid in the sense, like we would expect to see hybrid corn or different canola traits that have been emerged because of the crossing of the parents. And some of them, in fact, are newer to the market in the sense that they are newer types to the market, that they are fiber only. We kind of see historically that there are some that are more or less exclusively grown for grain, some that are grown for grain and also for the fiber that's left over after the grain harvest, whereas some of these hybrid hemp varieties are exclusively being grown for the fiber, and there's no expectation that they will produce seed in our growing climate. They just continue to grow and grow and grow taller and taller, so they're 15 feet by the end of the season, and then they're swathed for fiber only. So that's exciting, and it's also a fun place to get out of the sun in the summertime when you've got looking for shade. Scott also mentioned the greenhouse gas trial. This is a shot from last year where the boxes are located in the canola. This year we're growing it with wheat. The students are very patiently putting up with the fact that twice a week now they have been going out and doing gas straws from each of these, all of the different boxes. So it takes them a couple hours twice a week. Good data coming out of there, as Scott mentioned. And I'll also just mention here the teff trials. Teff is a crop that originally came from Ethiopia or from Northeast Africa. We've been growing it at PCDF since 2020, although it has some kind of, as I've talked about it enough, some people have mentioned, oh yeah, I grew it back in whatever, 2008, or oh, I grew it in, whatever. But it generally was a one-off and not looked at very closely. We've been trying to grow it more systematically as a forage initially, and then lately more as a grain crop, because there's tremendous interest from buyers who otherwise import the crop from Ethiopia largely. As you can see on the right-hand side, this is an incredibly small seed that we're dealing with. The dime looks like it, must be the size of a dinner plate. But in fact, the seed is just very, very small. There's 1.2 million seeds per pound, more or less. So it's about the size of Timothy seed. What we've been looking at is doing some variety trials. These were plants that we started using about 100 seeds per variety, and we planted them out in the field last year and produced, a couple of kilograms actually of seed per variety, which is shown here. And those form the basis for a variety trial. There's about 11 entries so far. And we assume that not all of them are going to do well. Some of them are probably just way too long season for what we have. Teff is kind of a baby when it's getting going. It doesn't grow very quickly in our region. Once it gets growing, though, you can see from the previous photos that it forms a pretty thick carpet. So there's a lot of interest there. What I'm excited about is that even the straw, once it has been harvested for grain, the straw is actually a very good forage option. So it's kind of a win-win crop, and certainly has a lot of interest economically behind it. That's kind of brings me to the end of my presentation. I don't know if it's a good time for questions now, Lionel, or whether they may be better for everybody who would be involved. But I will point out that our field day is going to be on August 8th here in Roblin at the field site. Don't worry, you will not get strapped to the top of the bus. But you can show up at 10:30 and the program will end at 2.
Okay, just a question regarding the teff. So small seed, does it just reseed itself? Is that what you were saying there?
It can. The danger, of course, will be if you end up blowing it out the back of the combine, you'll definitely develop a nice seed bank in the soil. But what we have found is that it generally will germinate. It likes warmer soil temperatures. So throughout the beginning and middle of May, it doesn't even really want to germinate in the soil on its own. So then once crop rotation will be important at that point. It will get pretty easily sprayed out of most crops at that point. As a grass, in any kind of your annual crops, it would, or in a broadleaf annual crop, it would be sprayed out pretty easily. And then I think in all but oats, I would not recommend growing oats after teff, but in barley and wheat, you would certainly be able to spray the teff out of the crop very easily.
So it's an annual then, right?
That's right.
Yeah. Okay. And seed wise, if you wanted to grow it?
There is seed available that we have used initially. All of our research was with a variety that's from Imperial Seed. So it's an unnamed variety that they sell, but it seems to actually do pretty well in the region. There's just a number of agronomic tips that we have kind of figured out the hard way. Again, it's kind of the going back to the we fail so you don't have to principle. So if there are people listening or watching who are interested in growing teff, I'd be very happy to chat with you on the phone or through email about it and share some of that info, as I have been able to do with some other producers, just to help avoid some of those pitfalls.
Okay, and the one question here is, how is it for saline areas?
That I don't actually know. We don't have a lot of salinity issues here on our site, so I can't actually comment on that. Although I would guess that it's pretty good. It's grown typically in regions that are extremely dry and extremely hot. So I assume that there's probably salinity issues that might develop as well in in some of its home regions.
Okay, and then for both you and Scott, are any of you doing any work with intercropping soybeans with another crop?
We are not at our site, so I'll let Scott speak to that.
Yeah, we tried to do it with corn this year. I'm thinking what happened with us, we had an issue with the soybeans coming up between the rows of corn. So we planted corn and then we turned around and planted our soybeans in between with the planter. And I think with the wheels compacting the soil, the depth of the soybean and the cool conditions, it just wasn't in the cards in that location for growing an intercrop. Any other intercrops we have is basically just the cereals with small legumes like alfalfa and clover within. But, and they look really good.
You did in previous years though, didn't you, Scott?
Oh yeah, last year we did the soybean within corn. Other years we did hairy vetch very successfully within corn. So we basically air seeded our fertility and hairy vetch first and then planted corn into it. Worked great, and it improves the protein value of the field overall, thus changing the nitrogen economy of that field by probably 15 to 30 pounds an acre of nitrogen value, better feed values, that sort of thing. And you're able to make that choice whether you want to, the corn for grain or for forage. I would just suggest forage. The vetch was starting to wind up on the chains of the corn header, and unless your corn is very competitive, you may have vetch getting up where you don't want it to be, entangling in your combine. So that's why we thought maybe the soybean would be better. We've been working with Covers and Co. Forage soybean. That's basically it's a Southern Carolina variety that won't mature here and produces lots of leaf material. It probably does work good. We just struggled last year with grasshoppers, and then this year with compaction. So it's been. I'm still going to keep trying though.
Okay, good. Well, thanks both you guys for coming on today and giving us an update. And I think we're gonna, again be advertising the tour date here, and July 25th is the WADO date, and August 8th is the PCDF date, and I think both would like it if you could RSVP. Just I think both of them, I know both of them usually have really good meals. So if you're you're wanting to be on the meal list, it would be good to let them know you're coming. And next week we're going to have the other two diversification centers on, talking about what they're having in their areas as well. So again, another informative day next week. Here's again all the contact information for the 4 diversification centers. So if you have any questions, want to get a hold of James and talk about the TEF, I think I hear more and more people talking about it. So I think it's probably something that you would want to maybe take a look at and see if it might have some fits on your farm.
And I love chatting about it too.
Oh, perfect, James. Yeah. And just a few more slides to finish up for the day. Your field crop production guide. Again, if you're putting fungicides on and you want to know the timing, it's in the book. If you're having to get on some wet fields and you're looking at spraying late and you want to know what chemicals are still good for getting some weed control done, again, that'll be in the book as well as to how late you can spray some chemicals. So, definitely if you don't have the book yet, grab it. The hay listing is up. I see some round bales being made between rainfall events here. So I think there's going to be looks right now that there could be a good crop out there of hay. So there might be a lot of guys looking to maybe market some bales. So a good place to advertise your hay. The crop residue burning program is going to start here in August. So keep an eye out for that.
Excuse me, Lionel, Scott looks like he wants to add something.
Oh, okay, sure.
Oh, just one comment on the corn intercropping part. I believe Arborg at Pizet are growing different legumes under their corn this year. So it might be something
Okay.
to watch on the next CropTalk.
Perfect. Thanks, Scott. Yeah, I think there's some interest in that as well. Talking to some guys looking at maybe and even the potential for maybe having two crops growing together. And so I think maybe corn might not have the fit for that, but maybe winter wheat or spring wheat maybe. So something flax might work as well. I think you might have done some work like on that in the past as well. Livestock producers, if you've got questions regarding forages, pastures, again, any of these people can give you a hand with any of your questions. The service centers, if you have any questions regarding your wet acres, there's the numbers to call because they can give you some advice as to how they're going to handle some of those wet acres as we get later into the season. And that'll take us to the end of the day today. So if you have any questions or if you got any ideas for future crop talks, there's my contact information, Lori's contact information, and join us next week for crop talk. That'll be July the 17th. Thanks for attending.
Thank you, everyone.